Between Conversation. Vicky Godwin, great to have you here. Why don't you just tell us who you are, where you're calling in from, and where you're based, where's your academic institution, and we can go from there.
All right. My full, the name that appears on publications is Victoria L. Godwin, but I go by Vicky. I'm much more casual. I'm currently an associate professor at Prairie View A&M University, which is located about an hour away from Houston, Texas. In fact, right now it's February and I have all the windows in the house open because it's 70 degrees outside. Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you there. Really. That's kind of strange. So I'm normally based in New York, but right now, Dallas, Texas, of all places.
Oh.
We actually have the complete opposite. We had a hot couple days here, and now we've got hail and we've got storms coming in. So Texas place, meteorologically speaking. I've been to.
Like last week, we had a hard freeze and had to wrap the pipes and had ice and burst pipes. So it's all over the map.
It's the cold realities of global warming, unfortunately. But it's been my first time to Texas for some time, and it's been quite. I needed to pack your swimsuit, and you need to pack your. Literally your little ice sneakers to try and get across the ice out here. So it's very affecting at all. But anyway, hey ho. Sorry, back to you, Vicky. So
all good. I'm also the principal editor for the Journal of Fandom Studies, and just recently took over that post after the unfortunate passing of the previous editor, Katherine Larsen. And Kathy kind of helped get that up and running. And I believe, James, that you mentioned that you'd also helped with the founding.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, let's turn our attention, I suppose, to Kathy for a second. So, I mean, first of all, congratulations and thank you on behalf of myself for taking over the reins at the Journal of Fandom Studies. Fantastic publication. One of the reasons it's so fantastic is because Kathy and her team have run a really tight ship and put together a really fantastic journal there. And unfortunately, we lost Kathy last week to a battle to an illness. And I just want to send my deepest condolences from my own heart, but also on behalf of Intellect, Kathy's friends, family, her colleagues, and of course to our baby. And just a really tragic loss. Kathy was such an integral component and part of the study globally. She used to go to the UK, do summer school courses. I knew her really well from the conference scene and the conference circuit, as I knew you did. And she was always like she had great feedback. She was very collegial. She was always inspiring and just had so much energy. And I've got so many happy memories of her. So it is a great loss, and of course to all the people who worked with her, and she had an impact on people's lives and on the discipline. Vicky, is there anything you want to say?
Kathy is part of how I got into the field of fan studies and into the journal. That truthfully, I was in so many of the fan studies panels at the Popular Culture Association that I'm one of those people where I'm going to lots of different panels. I have a lot of different interests. So I'd go to panels on vampires, on horror movies, on all sorts of different things. I happened to go to one on Supernatural and met Lynn Zubernis, who'd been working on a book with Kathy, and she introduced me, and I'm like, wait, there's a whole panel, there's a whole session area on this, and I just found myself sitting in more and more of those and sitting next to Kathy, and we'd just be talking about the journal. I offered to help out with the organizational elements of trying to keep track of what was submitted and helping her out on that end, especially as her health got a little more severe. And one of the things that I do want to try and maintain is, as you mentioned, Kathy was always so supportive and gave authors such helpful feedback. And I want to continue that tradition going forward with the journal of making it a place where folks can get helpful feedback and move on to those publications.
Well, before we talk about your research in other projects, fandom more specifically, as we've begun with Kathy and her legacy, and of course the journal that you've taken over, let's just go straight in and discuss a bit more about the Journal of Fandom Studies. So I know you're new to the table, but we can talk a bit about your vision. But maybe tell us a little bit about the journal, generally speaking, kind of its aims and scopes, and the kinds of the different kinds of articles or pieces of research that you'll be looking to publish. Yeah, over to you.
In terms of publication, I really want to expand out the type of topics that we'll be addressing. That fan studies is very multidisciplinary, and there's a lot of different topics. Most of my students, when I mention fan studies and my work in there, the first thing I think of is fan fiction, and that is a huge part of it. But I also want to address other practices, whether it's different musical fandoms, whether it's fans of musical groups or fans who are performing, whether it's filk or the various forms of wizard rock or Time Lord rock or all the other various things people are talking about. In fact, in an upcoming issue, it's either in the same issue or over the next two issues, we have articles ranging from Wagner to One Direction, of just getting a big scope, and even things like historical fandoms. Folks have talked about blackness in Sherlock Holmes fandom and the Baker Street Irregulars in articles that we've published in the past. We've had special issues on queer baiting, on comic book women, on Korean wave fandom. We've had special issues on archives, politics, on transitions, revivals, of what do you do when you're no longer a fan of something, or if you move on to a different fandom. Fan authors, so just all sorts of different possibilities. We've published articles on elitism and gatekeeping in fandom, anti-fandom, the people who just seem to love to hate something, conventions like Comic-Con, customizations and collecting, which is my own personal area, but we've also had articles from other folks talking about those sorts of issues. So it's basically fan studies incorporates a wide variety of media, whether it's television, film, sport. We've got a couple of articles on different sports fans coming up. Gaming. We've had articles on Minecraft and Summoner's Rift, and we're trying to get in a few more on video gaming. I'm old-fashioned. For me, gaming is tabletop gaming, like the old Dungeons and Dragons games is what I came up playing and what I tend to think of, but just making it open to a wide variety of different fans and fandoms of production and consumption of media. What do we enjoy watching? What do we enjoy making? And that's kind of how I got into it, because I make several things. I've got my collection back here behind me. I don't know how much of it shows up on the screen. Most of this is collection. I've got a couple of things that I customized over here, and I have more elsewhere, but we don't need to go into the details on that. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole.
Awesome. Okay, so it sounds like there's a huge range, diversity of potential scopes or potential topics that can be covered by people if they're looking to submit. Do you have the special issues or active CFPs that people might want to draw their attention to, or are you more focused on general issues and a range of topics that reflect what you've discussed?
Off the top of my head, I cannot think of any special issues coming up. We just recently put out one on archives and special collections, was the most recent one. And let me double check, because I don't want to accidentally say something. I don't think there is, but that doesn't mean, okay. Yeah, we had some plans for stuff, but it looks like we don't have anything currently in the pipeline, which just means that there's more opportunity for people to suggest them.
Well, that's
what I'm mostly interested in, is even if I didn't list it, I just listed a few things to hopefully give people something to bounce ideas off of and piggyback off of, that just because it wasn't on the list, that's all the more reason to suggest hey, this is something we'd like to cover. And we are very much open to suggestions for special issues. Some of the more interesting ones, we just had an article submitted recently on vaporware and reviewers are like, I've never heard of this fandom before, but this is fascinating and I enjoyed learning more about it. And I love that sort of thing of this may not be my fandom, but this is cool to find out about what people are doing over here.
Okay, right. So let's stop you right there. I have two things.
Hmm.
First of all, what is vaporware? You have to,
Um, I am not an expert in it, so all I know is from reviewing it, it seems to be covering like military hardware
okay.
and looking at videos of this in operation. And to find out more, tune into an upcoming issue of Journal of Fandom Studies.
Very. Uh, and I was going to say, in addition to that, if anyone's interested in finding out more about the Journal of Fandom Studies, and of course, maybe to reach out to Vicky directly, because as she says, we are all very much open to special themed issues, and it's Vicky who sends those ideas to. Her email address is on the website, so if you go to www.internetbooks.com, type in fandom or fandom studies, the journal will come up. You'll be able to download free issues. You can familiarize yourself with the kinds of materials that have been published, read free articles and reviews. But you can also find Vicky's details and the details of her editorial colleagues, and you can email directly. Yes, team reviews. Of course, you can also your of an article or something you would like to directly through the web portal or to Vicky or to one of her colleagues, and you can see the aims and scopes. You can see the editorial, advisory board members who are involved in it. You can subscribe. You can also see a complete list of abstracts of all the articles that have previously been published. So you can see whether your themed issue or your specific article may well be it. So that's the best place to go to find out more. But while we have Vicky, let's talk a bit more about the journal. What is there? Are there any particular articles? You just mentioned that special issue sounded very interesting. Are there any other particular articles that have come out recently, or any specific issues you might want to, been particularly interesting to you?
Um, Again, part of it is just my own interests of I like finding out about a lot of different things. So I think I mentioned a few of them of just corporate uses of fandoms, of how corporations will kind of use fan labor or fan affect to promote their own products. For me, coming from customizing, of just looking at how corporations will kind of tweak that a little bit and turn it into rhetoric that they can use to promote their own merchandise.
Right.
So lots of anti-fandom stuff. We've even talked about blues fandom in British periodicals, so it's all sorts of different possibilities. We've got an article coming out here soon on fan fashion.
Cool.
So fashion, theme parks, anything and everything is a possibility. And let me double check here and see if there's like a topic coming up that I missed out. Yeah, Lizzie Bennett Diaries fandom. So fans adapting existing fandoms, whether it's Jane Austen, and updating it into social media, and then fans of that particular work.
That's interesting because Jane drew my attention to fandom both through just my own research, and then of course also through the fan books and the fan Jane. I didn't realize how much fan fiction there was surrounding Jane Austen, updating of it. Of course, then that became a big deal kind of in the movies as well with Pride and Prejudice and Zombies and things like that. So there's things of that nature out there. So that also leads me just down to what you were talking about. So maybe this idea of the corporatization or the commodification of fandom, is that like a big concern in fan communities, or is that more of an academic kind of critical reflection? Or is this something you see a lot, fans being commoditized and then having things sold back to them?
As with many things, it kind of depends on the fandom. That with scholars, you see expressions of concern. The fandoms that I study are folks who are customizing 6-scale figures, kind of like the ones that we got talking about earlier back here, where for them it's a way to make money doing what you love. that folks are kind of eager to break into the business, even if they're not working for a particular corporation. Folks are trying to run their own sort of little cottage industries almost. That I mentioned before that, yeah, some of these are collections that some of them are customizations. Off at the corner, I've got a couple of Doctor Who figures where people sculpted the heads, painted the heads, offered those for sale, but it was more of a local thing on various fan forums or social media platforms, and then people trading back and forth. And there's always that tension of, okay, with some fandoms, if you sell it, it's seen as not being appropriate, and other fandoms selling it is, okay, I'm going to make money off of this. And I know I've seen articles where folks are examining things like Etsy or other places where fans actually turn their fandom into a business. And just like decades ago, people were concerned about hucksters in the dealer's room of, are you actually doing it because you're a fan, or are you just adopting that fan identity? Kind of like corporations would say, oh, we don't just make Star Wars, we also love it, or Star Wars or Star Trek or whatever the production is. That sometimes you look at stuff and go, okay, you're saying that you're a fan of this, but are you just looking for whatever the current keywords or buzzwords are and producing something that you know will probably sell?
That's interesting.
Mhm.
So I know that you have a background in cosplay as well, which we'll
Mhm.
talk about. But I would definitely want to get into this, your collectibles and the customization there as well. But before we do, what I think leads into it from what we've just been discussing at the moment is this concept of authenticity, very loaded term in many fandoms, in many subjects, whether it be from music and subculture, you know, people being things being appropriated or reappropriated and commoditized, sold back to the communities that created them. And I know with, say, cosplay, for example, in certain,
Mhm.
you know, there's no way to go and buy an item or whatever it might be. You would have to build that yourself, create that yourself. And part of that process, or part of the cosplaying, of course, the make and the crafts and having, you know,
Mhm.
the best costume look. So that's interesting. So yeah, maybe you could
Mhm.
unpick this idea.
And actually, one of the ironies is that most of the discussion of cosplay that I've found have not been dealing with the actual crafting aspect of it. That a lot of the articles that I've seen submitted are talking about cosplay in terms of identity work, of performance. And that's certainly an aspect, but the irony is that, you know, the actual building of the costume starts to become secondary or not even mentioned as people are talking about, okay, while you're wearing the costume, what sort of identity are you performing? What aspect of your identity is being manifested? And there were even accusations to kind of tie this into the authenticity, that the very nasty term of fake geek girl, that folks were saying, oh, you're just wearing that costume so people will pay attention to you or take pictures of you. You don't even know who that character is, which, you know, even there, that sometimes I'd look at a costume. I know at least once I made a costume because I looked at it and said, that will be a production challenge. That I want to figure out how to make this. It was a two-dimensional drawing of a comic book character. It's like that costume defies several laws of physics, but I want to figure out a way to make it real and something that a real person can wear. Of just, how am I going to have to sew this fabric? What sort of props am I going to have to build? How am I going to have to build those? So sometimes it was the problem solving that was the actual challenge. In fact, some of the figures, and they may not be visible on the shelves, are left over from when I made those costumes. That I made a Phoenix costume many, many years and many, many pounds ago. And I took old spandex scraps. I realized, yeah, I love this costume, but there's no room to display it in my house. You know, if I had life-size mannequins, that would eat up an entire room very quickly. So I scaled it down to doll size. So I used scraps from my old costume, dressed a Barbie in it. I have scraps from a Doctor Strange costume I made for my partner and scaled it down. And thus a hobby was born. And I eventually found, wait, there's enough interesting things going on in this hobby. Just like I talked about fans turning their hobby into a business. Can I sculpt heads? I wound up turning my hobby into academic articles of, ooh, can I write about it? Of just what's going on in my head? What are other fans saying about this?
Well, I'm sure you can see this, but I'm going to read it out. I've got an interesting question from the audience.
Ooh, yeah.
To what extent is the act of making an act of fan devotion that differs from consumption knowledge? So, to what extent is the act of making an act of fan devotion that differs from consumption knowledge?
That one's interesting because, yeah, that a lot of that construction is in a lot of ways devotion. That, in addition to that one motivation that I mentioned, I also have a couple of Doctor Who figures that I customized. And part of why I made them was I was a huge Doctor Who fan. Well, I still am. And it was a way of expressing the fandom. It's like there were no action figures readily available, not of those characters, and not to me here in the United States. And even then, it's like, well, I can't sculpt them, but what can I make? And the whole process of making it, in addition to expressing the fandom that I already had, now I look at it and just the hours that I spent on figuring out how to do it and on actually doing it kind of ties into that. It's like, and even there within the community, within the customizing community, folks are like, yeah, you could just spend money on a figure, or you could make it, and that gets a lot more subcultural capital. That they're more impressed by, okay, yeah, anyone could slap down cash and buy it, but did you make it? Did you figure out how to make it? Even if it's not, you put your time and energy into it, and that's a more notable act of devotion. Sorry.
You basically to authentic within the community is well, you get more kudos. Not expected that you should sort of make craft and devote you to your costume to be authentic and I guess to get props and kudos. That's good.
Yeah. And we're also kind of back to that whole authentic problem that sometimes it's not about, sometimes you get praise for, oh, wow, the extreme accuracy of a costume or a customized figure. In fact, I published an article that worked off of a common praise in that community was, oh, you must have a shrink ray. That you'd somehow miniaturize the real person or the real costume to have it in of just how detailed it looked. But just like within cosplay and costuming, there's a certain amount of praise for accuracy and detailing. There's also praise for doing a transformative version of your costume, right? That how many times we've seen a steampunk version of whichever character.
Yeah.
A steampunk version of Princess Leia, or a steampunk version of the Joker, or some other variation. I think I've also seen Darth Vader, but done up as a Ronin or a Shogun warrior, of just those sorts of permutations that folks do.
So that's quite a big part as well. I suppose just is it just that sort of search for I don't know, originating something within I guess kind of a tradition, you know, within the lineage of fan and try their own original take on it. And is that what the kind of Elseworlds style kind of takes, whether it be Ronin, Darth, or or steampunk? Steampunk seems to always pop up. What is it about steampunk?
I think it's that whole retro future of nostalgia for when we had optimism about the future of everything, and also that nostalgia for this imagined better past. Ignore the historical details. We have this idealized, romanticized vision. And I kind of like that idea of let's try and live up to this in a way. Yeah. Maybe that's my optimist coming out.
That's a really nice way of looking at it, philosophically speaking. We have another in the audience which follows on nicely, so I'll just read that one out. That, Vicky. Great. So, does authenticity become more highly regarded or transformative works? Is it genre specific?
Mostly it seems to be fan specific. I am very hesitant to make sweeping statements to represent any fandom as monolithic. That some fans are like, I want it exactly precise. Back when I was in the Society for Creative Anachronism, the joke was that for some members, SCA stood for Society for Compulsive Accuracy. of just how intensely detailed is something going to be. Are you going to recreate your medieval garb to the point of hand sewing it? Or is it perfectly fine to use a sewing machine and, it may not be accurate cloth or fabric? And apparently some historical reenactment societies will also have their own similar debates there. But within transformative, sometimes I'm like, I will go on either way. To me, is like, is it well made? Did you have fun with it? It also becomes a launching pad for, okay, let's take pictures and present them in dramatic ways. Yeah, and we were talking about steampunk. I can remember one guy even did like Geppetto and Pinocchio, but he did them as if Pinocchio was like a tiny little steampunk robot. Of just, it wasn't an existing Elseworld, it was something that he'd made up in his own head. And for a brief moment, I mean, it's not a full-fledged fan fiction story written out, but that image kind of creates a little miniature story world of we're all imagining, okay, what sort of adventures would these characters have? So yeah, that some folks want the accurate details, and some folks are like, let's just get creative and put it in a whole new situation.
Very cool. Yeah, it seems that question came from some research that Dr. Sarah Gilligan was doing, Sherlock Chronicles, that she was interviewing, who they were keen to be authentic, but she was wondering if that was specific to that fandom. It sounds very much like it's not specific to that fandom, but it's something that is shared by fan culture, especially those who are interested in costume. So on from that, speaking of costume, what's the best you've ever seen? What's your favorite, or have you seen like a 10-foot tall giant, or or you can have more than one, but what have been your favorites that you've encountered over the years?
My favorite one, honestly, do you remember the TV show Babylon 5?
I do.
Yeah, a lady came out and had dressed as one of the Centauri.
Oh, cool.
So she had a bald wig and she had the gown, which at the time I just saw, ooh, pretty gown. And then I later found out, okay, wait, that's kind of based on this fashion style from the 18th century. But she came out and it looked beautiful and very luxe, very fat. And then she announced that she had made the costume using things she'd found at garage sales. And the costume cost her a grand totals of $5. So she'd taken things she'd found, and to me, it may not have been the most dramatic or wow moment, but it was, okay, that was creative. She kind of set herself a challenge of what can I do for a budget? And I've kind of done versions of that myself, of just looking around going, what do I currently have in my storage bins? That's also kind of related to the issue of consumption, of just how many fandoms, whether it's knitters might have their yarn stash. If you sew, you have your fabric bins. Most of the customizers in the 6-scale community will have just plastic storage bins full of various parts. It's like, I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but this will come in handy some year. And I set myself a challenge one weekend of just digging through the bins going, okay, what has been in here for a while and what can I make of it? And it was just kind of a neat self-challenge there.
Reminds me a little bit of, this is going back a fair few years, but I remember being at primary school in England, and we had a medieval day, and we all had to come up with our best costume. And I fashioned mine out of cardboard boxes with some major. But I do. My friends got a sheet and collected tin foil, like aluminum milk bottle caps, which is what we used to have in England.
Oh, cool.
They're like round metal discs, and it must have been a year, and had like stuck them onto the sheet to make a coat. Oh yeah, it's pretty amazing when you think back what people can do, with a limited budget. Essentially, in my case, to try to costumes. And you mentioned the Phoenix, or when you say Phoenix, are we talking about X-Men here? Are we talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so that sounds like a pretty cool costume, but is that your favorite that you've made, or are there any others that stick out from your own cosplay practice?
It's probably one of my favorites because it was one of the first, and coming back to that authenticity element, in the comics, when the character, the very early issues with Chris Claremont and I think it was John Byrne drawing at that point, Yeah, another geekdom just manifested, sorry. But they even had some comment about her costume had changed and there were no seams visible on it. And as a seamstress, I'm like, how do I sew something with no seams? And you'll see cosplay photos now. It's a popular one for people to photograph. And the little authenticity goblin in my head is going, but you have seams. And it clearly said in issue number whatever that it does not have seams.
Right.
And but then you also have to say, yeah, there's authenticity, and then there's the laws of physics that you cannot physically get into it. But when I was making it, I'm like, okay, I have to have scenes, but how can I minimize them? How can I hide them as much as possible?
It's like you need to hook up with the level swimmer or cyclist to get one of these one suit, skin suits. I mean, this
Hmm.
cosplay push the future of athletic. But I digress. Well, we're going to get into, we're going to talk about your collectibles too, and I'm going to ask
Hmm.
from the audience in 1 second. But while we're talking about cosplay, I did just want to highlight the work of some of my colleagues here. Uh, Paul Mountfort, Adam Getsky, and Anne Pearson Smith in a book called Planet Cosplay, which really does try to cover all aspects of cosplay from theoretical through to performative and practice-driven craft, these other things. Please.
It's on my shelf.
Hey,
It is on my shelf. I love that book. One of the things I love about that book is, although we talk about it in terms of cosplay, that it actually addresses things like costuming back at Worldcon in like 1939. They were actually talking about 19th century examples that we would now consider costuming. So it was fascinating to see that sort of historical context for it also. So sorry I interrupted you, but I just wanted to say it's a cool book.
yeah, saying so as well. No, it's a really good, it's a weighty tome. It's a fantastic book. It covers fashion, it covers all different aspects, crafting. Then there's also photo essays and examples of costumes as well, which is great to see. But then some interesting questions raised again about if you're a photographer, how do you go about taking pictures of people? Because they're almost an exhibit, a work of art. But then something else we can get into as well is kind of the sexualization and exploitative nature of cosplay, and how people act in nefarious reasons. And of course,
Mhm.
how I know we published work recently, cosplay and pornography, and of course, now with TikTok and Reels and social media, how much cosplay is being used and sexualized to get likes and to try and increase followers. So that was an interesting article as well that was recently.
Mhm.
I'll have to dig that out. But
Actually, no, I'm wondering, did they bring up stuff like even early Betty Page photos where people would write in and request her to dress up a certain way?
and again, this isn't anything new. Random
Mhm.
cosplay, all these things have all been entwined since uh, pre-Victoria and all the rest of it.
Mhm.
But I think the example of Betty Page would be a really good one.
Mhm.
And Betty Boop, of course, as well, just slightly different, but just quite a lot. And then the furry conventions as well, which is often you'll find is at the same time as the Society of Media Studies, and from occasion they have the furry convention, which for anyone who doesn't know is people dressed up as furry animals. Costumes are often incredibly elaborate, large, crazy, costume, teddy bear, kinds of. But they often have it in the same hotel space as the Society of Cinema and Media Studies, so it's an interesting convention week. Anyway, I'm digressing again,
Mhm.
but I do have a question.
Oh, I've been to a few of those interesting crossovers. I went to one science fiction
Oh yeah,
convention where we had a Baptist ministers convention in at the same time. That made for some interesting interactions in the elevator. I was wearing a costume that looked kind of like a demon, and someone swore they saw a Baptist cross themselves. So I choose to interpret that as praise for how effective the costume came out. But yeah, we've also had science fiction conventions booked at the same hotel as some military academy. I can't remember whether they were Navy or Air Force, but they were fun.
that does sound like that. I've got a good question in here, which kind of me and you can both answer, and also it would lead to another interesting question prior to us delving deeper into fandom and your fandom more specifically. So this is from Glasgow Cares. I am an MA student interested in the Tomb Raider 25th anniversary celebration, specifically the fandom's expectations of the event versus the developer's delivery. And would this be relevant? I mean, I'd say definitely 100%.
Yeah.
Would you like to just maybe go into a little bit more detail, perhaps about how Glasgow Kes can get in touch, as I mentioned earlier? And yeah, and I mean, that's me, that just on the money.
Yeah. We've got my email address, like you mentioned, is at the web page, and you might want to repeat that because I do not always remember specific URLs. And we also have the online submission platform, so you can email things to me directly, and I can put it into the pipeline. And then, can you remember what the URL is for the? We call it JAWS. I'm not sure whether that's the official name, and I'm sure JAWS is an acronym for something, but I like having my little shark web page where people can submit stuff.
Well, Glasgow Cares, one thing you're going to learn as you become, fall deeper into the murky depths of academia and scholarship is that everything's got a ridiculous acronym. And if you can remember more than 10, you're going to be a great success within this industry, that is for sure. But to keep things simple, if you go to www.intellectbook.com and you just Fandom Studies in the search engine, it will bring up Fandom Studies, the journal. And on there, you will find all the information you need, including Vicky's email address, including the JAWS platform, which is an online portal where you can submit your abstract or an actual article and go to yeah. So yeah,
and if you submit it through that, you can upload the manuscript, you can enter the abstract, the metadata, all that information, and it gets sent to me. I get a notification, and I can get it started through the process.
And again, Glasgow Kes, no stupid questions, especially when you're new to academia. It's a murky world, and
it sounds interesting, and I don't know if it would be relevant. Matt Hills had a book about the Doctor Who anniversary. I think it was the 50th anniversary year. And I'm not sure, I think he discussed some about what fan expectations were for, okay, what would be the sort of things that they wanted to see in terms of an anniversary versus what they actually got and how they reacted to it. It's been a while since I read the book, so you might want to double check me on it, but that might be useful or not. I don't know.
Great. Oh, thanks, Vic. No, I think that's good. I think with fandom, it's definitely one of the areas where you can interpolate between different books that focus on a different fandom and utilize them for your own research. So I think that's a tip. But speaking of tips, while we're on this subject, I was wanting to ask you, especially as a journal editor now, what are your tips for emerging scholars who are looking to submit perhaps their first article to a journal? What are your do's and don'ts, or just what are your, a couple of top tips that you've learned?
Top tips, I mean, the basics that work for every journal of make sure that you're following the procedures, that if the journal asks you for an abstract for keywords for a certain length, make sure that you hit it. One thing that keeps coming up is we will get submissions occasionally that make no mentions of fans whatsoever. So those are always kind of odd, where we send them back going, did you maybe hit the wrong button? It's like, okay, this is a nice topic, but where are the fans in the fan studies here? So that obviously, make sure to mention how fans are producing this or consuming this or otherwise contributing to it, what sort of practices are going on. The web page that we've mentioned a few times here lists the specific word count, obviously following, I think it's Harvard style, that we use for the citations, for the references.
Yeah, and just to add to that, every journal will have a notebook, and you will find that, as Vicky correctly finds, on each journal's page, whether that's an intellect or a different, or even if it's an only this publication. And what's vitally important is that you read them to the T, because it's a bit like writing or writing a CV and sending it to one job, but it's on an application form for another. You've got to follow those notes to the T, otherwise you will end up going to the back of you. And it's things like, you've got to submit keywords, metadata, an abstract, your academic affiliation if you have one, a CV, and then, just things like making sure it's in the, like we said, Harvard style or MLA or whatever the style may be, certain spellings, that kind of thing, certain types of referencing.
keep it all up to date, because we've had articles that wound up getting bumped from one issue, had to go into another issue because we didn't get a certain metadata from them. They didn't send keywords, or we didn't have an email, or we didn't have an up-to-date email. Because the journal process can take a while by the time you send to reviewers. I'm trying to tighten it up and speed it up a little bit, but it does take time. I mean, if someone sends you a manuscript, you want to spend time to review it, and then you have copy editing and proofreading, and sometimes people move or change institutions, and you want to make sure that everything's up to date, and we can get hold of you to say, hey, can you copy edit this? Can you make sure that everything looks right?
No, yeah, good words of advice there as well. And I just, yeah, really just make sure you read everything and check all the details before you submit it. And again, I expect some knockbacks. You know, it's very normal to write something for it to be declined, to go back with something else, or expect some serious peer review and some feedback. But it often really allows you to write a better essay or a better article down the line. But you got to develop some thick skin, and do not expect to get published the first time you submit something, because these journals have high rejection rates, and even if your work's great, it might just be finessed and turning from a great essay into a great journal article. But the best way you can do that is by submitting and getting feedback. So I'd get that to everyone. While we're talking about key themes and things of that nature, in terms of fandom studies, what do you perceive as the key texts? And are there any sort of top books that you would highlight, or any that have been a big influence on you? I know I've pulled that one out of the air, so if you don't have...
Nope. I'm laughing because this comes back to while we were sitting in session panels at Popular Culture Association. Kathy and I would basically we had a little drinking game, and we had our bottles of water to drink along with. Every time someone quoted Henry Jenkins, that you took a drink, you took a little sip of water, because he's one of the texts that gets quoted a lot. Right. Although my partner tends to phrase it, when I was explaining the stories, and he started delivering it like Leroy Jenkins. Except Henry Jenkins. And every time someone quoted that, I had to like bite my tongue to keep, like, in best gamer voice, leading the charge there.
I will say that's a bit of a nerdy insight. I don't even games, so that's kind of hilarious. But that's become a cultural reference out of fandom and gaming. If anyone the great Leroy Jenkins moment, then I would go into YouTube and just Google Leroy Jenkins. It won't get you back from your job. It is pretty, and it will give you an insight how to ruin gamers' lives.
I haven't done video gaming, but as I mentioned, from tabletop gaming experiences, I have pulled a few Leroy Jenkins moments myself, and have seen players do it while I was GMing or DMing, game mastering or dungeon mastering, the person running and telling the story. And as you might have noticed from some of my references, my fandoms are all over the place, which is part of why I love fandom studies. I mentioned multidisciplinary and just how many different intersecting fandoms people can have. That part of the transformative cosplay we got talking about earlier are very often because fans have multiple fandoms. So they might have a Star Wars Stormtrooper, but they do it up in the style of Hello Kitty, because they also like those particular merchandise.
Artistic to me, that's for sure. So you're getting a little bit of jip from the audience here saying water, and I think the point was that if it was tequila or liquor, you wouldn't have made it through the session, because old Henry Jenkins is referred to quite readily. Remember the name of his main book on subcultures? I forget.
Textual Poachers. Textual Poachers. And he's published multiple works that also likewise get quoted. And one of the things that, as a beginning scholar in fandom studies, when I first got into it, that I saw everyone quoting Jenkins, I'm like, but wait a minute, Penley was also writing about this same stuff before. Why are we quoting him but not her? But Penley was mostly writing about romance readers. So is that maybe also part of it? That, yeah, Jenkins was writing about a lot of female fans, but they were fans of science fiction, not necessarily of romance novels. And some of the romance novels would cross over into Star Trek. So just that sort of, why do we cite one book but not the other? And I know there was another one that all came out around the same time after I'd already declared my dissertation topic and gotten into it, where I discovered these books and went, I could have had a V8. Come on, I could have done this.
And well, following on from that, then, we obviously know that Jenkins and Penley are big texts that people should have a look for as well, and to get familiar with writing on fandom and these kind of subcultures.
Those are like beginning texts. They're foundational texts that people have moved on, and there's lots of other texts out there since then.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to ask personally, what have been some of the texts that have had the greatest, or you know, all writers or theorists, would have had the most impact on you and your own scholarship?
Ooh, who do I quote a lot? Uh, um, that one's kind of hard because one of the things that one of the appeals to me of fandom studies is just that openness to a lot of different discussions. That I publish a lot on the customized action figures, the collectible action figures, and when I first started publishing, there wasn't really that much on it. So perversely, I wound up having to read a lot of articles and publications on Barbie because it was the closest comparison that was out there at that time. And things have since moved on. So I was, dealing with discussions of people who customize Barbies, and then luckily, early issues of the Journal of Fandom Studies had articles by Bob Rehack on object practices and material studies, to where he was actually talking about the things that fans make or use. So he was talking about like Universal monster movie fans who were building the models and assembling them and kind of customizing them, or even things like on the tabletop role-playing games, things like the strategy games, where you would have the little starships.
Yeah.
And people would kind of paint those and customize those a little bit in addition to building them up. So Rehack was very useful. I wind up citing Hills a lot. He wrote an article on mimetic fandom, and that kind of spins off what we were talking about. One of the aspects of the debates over authenticity is, fan studies tends to emphasize transformative works, sometimes to the point of, we've got all these fans trying to make these accurate reproductions, and Matt Hills wrote a very interesting article on mimesis. I think it was something like, Daft Punk helmets and Dalek balls was somewhere in the title of it, where he was talking about people who are trying to make prop replica building. People who will build prop replica lightsabers, where the whole selling point is, oh, look how accurate it is. Here's a picture of the actual prop. Here's the picture of mine. It's the same image, of just how accurate they can make it look.
Very interesting, Vicky. Thank you for that. Like for comment as well. I just want to go back to our audience again. We've got a couple of interesting statements that I'll just read out here. So we have a comment saying that Heather Joseph Witham's 1996 book on Star Trek fans and costume is often overlooked. So heads up on that. And then Hez again came back with another insightful comment. There's been a lot of social media lately about why do we beat up on teenage fangirls who love a certain band, but football hooliganism in adult men is okay. And he said Penley would think that was probably interesting. So yeah, good points, well raised. Thank you for the conversation today.
And actually, the Star Trek costuming book that they just mentioned, I think that was one of the ones that I actually wound up having to draw on, even for my 1/6 scale, because they were talking about people making Klingon armor and just how they'd wind up altering it. Here's the screen accurate version, and then here's how I kind of tweaked it to make kind of their own character. This is my own persona being manifested instead of some existing character. This is a character I created in my own head, or this is me as a Klingon, and here's and people would add little details that meant something to them.
Cool. I'm jumping around a little bit because we've got about 5 minutes left, but I did want to just go right back to day one. If I'm used to work in TV, so I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about your time in television, what you were up to, how you enjoyed that experience, and then why how you ended up in academia. If you can give us a little bit of an overview.
My time in television was not nearly that glamorous. I was working at local TV stations. I was a student working on my undergraduate degrees and my master's degrees eventually down in Arkansas. So I was working at the local stations, putting out the news, which means I might be up at 3 a.m. to help turn on the transmitter. I might be there at 11 o'clock at night answering phone calls. And that was the irony. They always put me on the phone because I was the only one who would have sympathy when people called in, because the sports show would always run long. It didn't have a set ending time. The sports guys talked about sports until they were done talking about sports. And Star Trek: The Next Generation was scheduled to come after that. And all the fans would call in going, when is Star Trek going to start? When is the sports show going to end? So I was the one who was always fielding that, going, well, it tends to run at an undetermined amount of, just sit next to your, we had VCRs then with ready to hit record. It's like, I can empathize as soon as I can. I'm heading straight home and hope I don't miss too much. I'm right there with you. And so that was my designated job.
So we got a fan head clashing there between the sports fans fighting for their own moment on television. All right. What drew you to academia then? Did it seem like a logical progression? It sounds like TV, but just me kind of funding journey into academia.
I started when I went to college, I wanted to work in television. Then I worked in television and found that a lot of the jobs there were minimum wage. You're up at 3 a.m. You're, working every Thanksgiving, and I didn't like the schedule. Then I looked at academia and said, wait a minute, my job would be learning new things and talking about interesting things. I missed an opportunity here. So I actually, after spending a couple of years out working in television at the very much the ground level, I came back into academia and said, wait, I can make a job out of this, of just writing about all this cool stuff. This is where I'm staying from now on.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thanks. And just thinking then, what are you currently working on? Is everything focused around the journal, or are you working on any book projects, or are you attending any conferences? What's next for Vicky?
I'm attending virtual conferences that, truthfully, I mean, the pandemic has been horrible, but it has offered up more virtual opportunities for folks who are limited in terms of travel, whether due to physical situations or financial situations. So I have been benefiting from the ability to attend conferences I normally would not be able to afford financially, or to take the time off to attend. So I will be going to the Popular Culture Association conference. I believe that's in April, if I remember correctly. They did offer an online version, which, yay, that was truthfully what I've been looking for recently, of what is something where I do not have to worry about quarantine or other issues, and it is so much more affordable. And also, it may be my introvert nature. I've found that I'm enjoying the chat. I am more likely to socialize. And truthfully, if you're in a live panel presentation, you don't want to be socializing with your neighbor, because that's like talking in class and it can be disruptive and distracting. Whereas with the chat, I have had so many interesting side conversations of, ooh, that reminds me of this, or, oh, have you read this? So there's like the presentation sparking all of these cool feedback elements over in the chat.
I completely agree. I mean, I get back to real in-person conferences, but the fact that it'll always be hybrid from now on is great, because it widens access. It means that you don't have to be super rich or have funds to go and travel to these events, and it means and all the things that you've highlighted. Just to mention, Intellect is attending multiple virtual conferences. We were just at hip hop conference last week, and this week we are at the College Art Association virtual conference. If anyone is there, please do say hi. We will also be taking part in numerous conferences that are now virtual only. So the Society for Cinema and Media Studies annual conference. We'll also be at the Popular Culture Association annual conference. and then perhaps some in-person ones as well. We're going to the environmental history event. The list goes on, but keep an eye out for all these virtual and in-person conferences. Do come by, say hi to me or any of my colleagues that are there. That's how I met Vicky. That's how Vicky's working. So, you know, conferences, whether they be virtual or in person, are a great way for you to meet, communicate, interact with publishers, with colleagues, with peers. You know, do that, and don't challenge Vicky to a tequila or water drinking contest in any. Vicky, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really fun. It's been very illuminating. I just want to again reiterate what a great loss Kathy Larsen is to academia. She was a wonderful woman, and we do send our condolences to her family, friends, colleagues, and anyone who had the pleasure of meeting her. With great that I have to say that, but Vicky, it's great to have you helm, and I know you're going to do a fantastic job, and we can all see your passion. It's clear. So thank you so much for joining me on In Conversation. We'll be back again next week. We'll be revealing who our next guest will be over the next couple of days, but it's going to be a big one. It's going to be an interesting one, so do watch this space. But before I say goodbye, and before we say goodbye, Vicky, any final thoughts or anything you want to just highlight on the way out? Any comments?
Well, you were talking about like advice for submissions. It's kind of a permutation of the old phrase, the best dissertation is a done dissertation, that the best submission is a submitted submission of feel free to submit, you know, of every bit of feedback helps you to revise that. We have someone just sent back something where they sent me a nice email saying, yeah, I submitted 2 years ago. Y'all gave me some good advice. I took it on board. I've been spending the past couple of years doing the research project that advice inspired, and can I resubmit it? I'm like, heck yeah. That it is meant in the best possible way of trying to help improve everyone's contributions here. So I'm right there with you. I see the feedback, and I have my moment of, everybody hates me, this is horrible, and I let it sit for a moment. I come back and go, okay, yeah, actually, that's a fair point. All right, yeah. And then I look at the finished product and go, that is better. It was painful and I cried a little bit, but it is better in the long run. So please submit it. We offer kind feedback to help folks get it published.
Well, Vicky, thank you. Great point to be. Thank you for our audience, and please join us again next week. Vicky, thank you so much. I will see you.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Where we can both get dressed up and drink water shots.
Yes.
Thank you. Cheers, everybody.